Lost your mop, honey? The CFO smirks as Emily walks into the boardroom. They laugh. They mock. They have no idea who she really is. But when Emily places a single document on the table, everything changes. This is a share certificate for 51% of Hale Manufacturing. The janitor they belittled? She's the granddaughter of the company's forgotten co-founder and the real majority owner of the entire company. Now she's about to clean house in a way they never expected, save hundreds of jobs, and expose the corruption that's been hiding in plain sight. From invisible to unstoppable, Emily Walker is about to teach these executives what real power looks like. They never saw her coming. The old clock on the wall of Hale Manufacturing ticked loudly in the quiet. It was 4 in the morning, long before the sun would think about waking up the small southern town. Emily Walker, all 27 years of her, moved like a shadow through the empty halls. Her cart, filled with cleaning supplies, rumbled softly on the worn linoleum floors. She was the night janitor, the person most of the day shift workers never saw, or if they did, never really noticed. To them, she was just part of the building, like the humming fluorescent lights or the faint smell of machine oil that always hung in the air. Emily knew the plant like the back of her hand. She knew which floorboards creaked and which doors stuck. She knew the quiet hum of the machines when they were resting and the roar they made when they were alive during the day, churning out textiles and auto parts. She'd once dreamed of designing those machines, of making them better, faster, more efficient. She had even started studying mechanical engineering online, late at night after her shifts, her mind sharp even when her body was tired. But life had a way of changing dreams. Her mother had gotten sick, very sick, and Emily had put her studies, her ambitions, everything on hold to care for her. Now her mother was gone, and Emily was still here, mopping floors and emptying trash cans in the place her heart ached for in a different way. Sometimes a late-working office staffer or an early-arriving manager would pass her. They'd call her girl or helper, their voices impatient. Girl, can you make sure the coffee pot is clean for the morning? Or helper, there's a spill in the break room. They never used her name. Emily doubted they even knew it. The executives, the ones with the big offices on the top floor, they were even worse. They'd walk by her like she was invisible, their expensive shoes clicking on the tiles, their voices loud as they talked about profits and losses. If you're already feeling for Emily and want to see her journey, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. This story has a way of surprising you, and you won't want to miss a moment. One morning, just as the sky was turning a pale gray, Emily was polishing the brass nameplate outside the CEO's office. Mr. Abernathy, a senior vice president with a face that always looked like he'd smelled something bad, came striding down the hall. Emily, startled, stepped back and accidentally bumped his arm with her elbow. His briefcase clattered to the floor. Mr. Abernathy's face turned a shade redder. "Watch it," he snapped, snatching up his briefcase. He gave her a once-over, his eyes lingering on her faded blue work shirt and jeans. "Goodness, can't you even manage that? Stick to mops, sweetheart. Some people just aren't cut out for more." He huffed and continued on his way, not even a glance back. Emily just bit her lip and picked up her polishing cloth. Sweetheart. The word felt like a tiny, sharp stone in her shoe. Her lunch, or rather her pre-dawn breakfast, was usually a peanut butter sandwich and an apple. She ate it in the small supply closet on the 3rd floor, sitting on an overturned bucket. It was cramped and smelled of disinfectant and floor wax, but it was quiet. It was her space. Or so she thought. One day, Mrs. Davis from accounting poked her head in. "Is that you eating in here again, Emily?" she asked, her nose wrinkled. "Honestly, it smells like peanut butter in here all the time. Some of us are trying to work, you know." Emily just nodded, wrapped up her half-eaten sandwich, and said, "Sorry, Mrs. Davis." She ate the rest of it standing by her cart in the hallway. Back in the small locker room for the cleaning staff, Emily had a battered metal locker. Inside, along with her spare uniform and a worn copy of a mechanical engineering textbook, was an old, beat-up leather folder. It was tied shut with a faded string. She saw it every night when she started her shift and every morning when she finished. She touched it sometimes, her fingers tracing the worn leather, but she never opened it. Not yet. It held secrets and promises and a weight she wasn't sure she was ready to carry. But she kept it close, a silent reminder of a past almost forgotten and a future that felt impossibly far away. The contents of that folder were a map to a different life, a life where she was more than just the girl who cleaned the floors. Every morning as Emily clocked out, she passed a large frame plaque in the main lobby. It listed the founders of Hale Manufacturing, George Hale and Henry Walker. Dust often gathered on the glass, and Emily would gently wipe it clean with the edge of her sleeve. Most people only ever talked about George Hale. His oil portrait hung in the boardroom, and his son, Preston Hale, was now the CEO, carrying on the family name. Henry Walker, though, was just a name on the plaque, almost a ghost. But to Emily, that name was everything. Henry Walker was her grandfather. A memory often surfaced, clear and warm as a summer day. She was 12, small for her age, with grease on her nose and a wrench in her hand that felt almost too big. She was in her grandfather's dusty workshop, not the big factory, but his personal space, filled with tools and half-finished inventions. They were working on an old, stubborn motor from a piece of farm equipment. Her grandfather, Henry, with his calloused hands and kind eyes, patiently showed her how the pieces fit together, how the spark ignited life. "You've got a knack for this, Emily Bug," he'd said, his voice rumbling like a gentle engine. He'd looked around the workshop, then his gaze seemed to go far off, towards the distant silhouette of the Hale manufacturing plant. "This place, the big one," he gestured, "it's more than just metal and machines. It's about people, about building something that lasts. One day, Emily, a piece of this, maybe even all of it, will be yours. You'll know what to do with it. You'll make it right." She hadn't understood then, not really. But after he passed, when she was just a teenager, his lawyer had explained. Her grandfather, co-founder Henry Walker, had been a brilliant engineer, the true heart of Hale Manufacturing's early innovations. But George Hale, the businessman, the smooth talker, had been greedy. He'd wanted all the glory, all the control. Through a series of clever, cruel maneuvers and outright lies, George had systematically pushed Henry out, rewriting the company's history to erase his partner's contributions. Henry had been heartbroken but not broken. He'd held onto his shares, a majority stake of 51%, passed down through a quietly managed trust. And he'd left them, all of them, to Emily. Along with the share certificates, tucked inside that beat-up leather folder, was a letter, written in her grandfather's familiar, steady hand. "My dearest Emily," it began. "Life doesn't always deal a fair hand. I built this company on honesty and hard work, with dreams of it helping our town, our people. George Hale, well, he had different ideas. These shares are your birthright, your legacy. But I don't want you to wade into that viper's nest unprepared. Watch. Listen. Learn. Don't step in, don't reveal yourself, unless they truly forget who built this company and what it stands for. Wait for the right time. Your heart, your good sense, will tell you when that is. And remember, little Emily Bug, always fix what's broken." So Emily had waited. She'd watched George Hale's son, Preston, take over, watched the company culture shift, becoming colder, more focused on profit margins than people. She'd seen good workers, people her grandfather would have valued, treated poorly. She'd heard the whispers of her grandfather being a failed partner, a footnote in the Hale family's grand story. It stung, a deep, persistent ache. But she'd honored his wish. She'd remained in the shadows, the quiet janitor, learning the company from the ground up, seeing its flaws, its forgotten corners, its slowly dimming soul. She understood now why he'd wanted her to wait. He wanted her to see it all, unfiltered, so when the time came, she would truly know what needed fixing. The whisper started on a Tuesday night. Emily was emptying the trash cans in the executive wing, a task she usually saved for last as it was the quietest part of her shift. Most of the important people had long gone home. But tonight, lights were still on in one of the smaller conference rooms. Voices, low and laced with a kind of smug amusement, drifted into the hallway. Emily paused, her hand hovering over a bin full of crumpled papers and coffee cups. "It's a done deal, then," one voice, smooth and self-satisfied, said. Emily recognized it as belonging to Mr. Davies, one of the board members she'd seen schmoozing with Preston Hale. Another voice, deeper and rougher, chuckled. "Preston's finally got the stomach for it. We'll outsource most of the floor staff. Cheaper labor overseas, you know. Most of them down there don't even speak English anyway, so what's the difference?" A cold dread trickled down Emily's spine. Floor staff. That meant the machinists, the assembly line workers, the packers, the heart of the factory. Many of them were her neighbors, people she'd known her whole life, people who had families to feed in their small town where Hale Manufacturing was the biggest, often the only employer. "And the cleanup crew?" a third voice asked, a little hesitant. "Oh, them too, of course," Mr. Davies said with a dismissive wave of his hand, though Emily couldn't see it. "First to go, easiest to replace. We can get a contract service for half the price." Her own job. Her friends in the maintenance department. Gone. Just like that. Emily felt sick. She backed away slowly, her cart forgotten. She needed to know more. Later, while cleaning Preston Hale's expansive office, a space that always felt cold despite the plush carpets and expensive artwork, she saw a memo left carelessly on his otherwise pristine desk. It was marked confidential, Project Streamline. Her eyes scanned the bullet points. Workforce reduction, 30%, Phase 1, janitorial and low-skill manufacturing, target implementation, Q4, 30%. That was hundreds of jobs. Gutted. For what? So men like Davies and Hale could have even bigger bonuses? That night, Emily didn't go straight home after her shift. She went to her locker, her hands trembling slightly as she fumbled with the combination lock. She pulled out the beat-up leather folder. Back in her small apartment, with the first rays of dawn painting the sky outside her window, she untied the faded string. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed legal documents, were the share certificates, crisp and official, stating Henry Walker's 51% ownership of Hale Manufacturing, now legally hers. There was the SEC registration, the original founding agreement signed by both her grandfather and George Hale, every I dotted, every T crossed. It was all there. All real. All legally sound. Her grandfather had been meticulous. There was something else in the folder too. A photograph. It was an old black and white picture of two men standing proudly in front of the newly built Hale manufacturing plant. One was a young, smiling George Hale. The other was her grandfather, Henry Walker, his arm around George's shoulder, a look of hopeful pride on his face. Emily knew this photo. A cropped version of it hung in Preston Hale's office, a version that only showed George Hale, his arm awkwardly around empty air where Henry Walker had once stood. Preston had literally cut her grandfather out of the picture, out of history. Looking at the original photo, at her grandfather's honest, hopeful face, and then thinking of the callous voices discussing layoffs, the casual cruelty of it all, something inside Emily snapped. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. Don't step in unless they forget who built this. They had forgotten. They had forgotten completely. The time to wait was over. This story is really heating up, isn't it? Before we see what Emily does next and how these executives react, take a quick moment to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far these stories of quiet strength and unexpected turns can travel around the world. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Emily knew this because she'd found a discarded agenda in a trash can. She also knew that today, Preston Hale was going to formally propose his Project Streamline, the plan that would destroy so many lives. Emily spent the early morning hours not with her mop and bucket, but carefully choosing her clothes. She didn't own a fancy suit, but she had a clean, pressed navy blue blouse, a simple dark skirt, and sensible, polished shoes. She looked neat, professional, and utterly out of place for a janitor at Hale Manufacturing. In her hand, she clutched the beat-up leather folder. At precisely 9:58 a.m., Emily Walker walked through the heavy oak doors of the Hale Manufacturing boardroom. The room was already buzzing. Men in expensive suits and one woman, Martha Evans, a stern-looking senior board member, were gathered around a long, polished mahogany table. Coffee cups steamed and papers rustled. Preston Hale, CEO, son of George Hale, sat at the head of the table, a smirking, entitled air about him. He was mid-sentence when Emily entered. All conversation stopped. Heads turned. Eyes, wide with surprise and then amusement, fixed on her. Well, look what the cat dragged in, chuckled Mr. Davies, the one she'd overheard talking about layoffs. Another executive, a portly man Emily recognized as the CFO, Mr. Henderson, snorted. Lost your mop, honey? He asked, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. Preston Hale leaned back in his chair, a look of utter disbelief mixed with annoyance on his face. Emily, is it? I believe you're on the wrong floor. And about 10 hours early for your shift. Laughter rippled around the table. Emily's heart was pounding like a drum against her ribs, but her face remained calm. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. Your heart, your good sense, will tell you when. This was it. She walked steadily towards the table, her footsteps unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet that followed the laughter. She didn't say a word. She simply reached the table, untied the string of the leather folder, and took out a single, official-looking document. With a steady hand, she placed her ownership certificate directly in front of Preston Hale. The silence in the room was now absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Preston Hale stared at the document, then at Emily, then back at the document. A vein throbbed in his temple. What is this supposed to be? He finally managed, his voice tight. Some kind of joke? It's no joke, Mr. Hale, Emily said, her voice clear and even, surprising even herself with its steadiness. It's a share certificate. For 51% of Hale Manufacturing. A gasp went around the table. Mr. Davies choked on his coffee. Martha Evans leaned forward, her eyes narrowed, scrutinizing Emily. Preston Hale snatched up the paper, his face turning a blotchy red. This is absurd. This is fraudulent," he sputtered. "I assure you it's quite real," Emily stated. "Perhaps your legal officer would like to examine it? And the supporting documents." She gestured to the folder, which also contained the founding agreement and her grandfather's last will and testament. Mr. Lexington, the company's chief legal counsel, a man who usually looked unflappable, now appeared distinctly flapped. He hesitantly took the certificate from Preston's trembling hand. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his pocket and began to read, his brow furrowed. The other board members watched, frozen. The only sound was the rustle of paper as Lexington turned the certificate over, examining the seals, the signatures. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, Lexington looked up, his face pale. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale, members of the board. I've seen copies of the original founding documents. The signatures appear authentic. The share registry details align. Pending a more thorough verification, which I will conduct immediately, this certificate, it appears to be legitimate." He looked at Emily, a new dawning respect, or perhaps fear, in his eyes. "Miss Walker, it seems you are indeed the majority owner of Hale Manufacturing." The room erupted not in laughter this time, but in stunned, disbelieving silence. Preston Hale looked like he'd been punched in the gut. The janitor they dismissed, ignored, and insulted, the girl they thought was good only for mops, now held the fate of their company and their careers in her work-worn hands. The air in the boardroom crackled with tension. Preston Hale was still sputtering, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. This is impossible. My father would never." "Who even is Henry Walker to you?" "Henry Walker was my grandfather," Emily said, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through Preston's bluster. "He was the co-founder of this company, the one your father, George Hale, pushed out and tried to erase from its history." She then turned her attention to the matter at hand. "The first order of business," Emily stated, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces, "is to halt any and all proposed layoffs, effective immediately. Project Streamline is dead." A shocked silence, then Martha Evans, the senior board member who had been watching Emily intently, spoke up. "I second that motion." Her voice was crisp and decisive. Preston slammed his hand on the table. "You can't do this. I am the CEO of this company. Actually, Mr. Hale," Emily countered calmly, "as the majority shareholder, I can. And I am." She opened her leather folder again, not with anger, but with a sad sort of weariness. "And speaking of your leadership, Mr. Hale, I have some concerns." She pulled out a few more documents, not her grandfather's this time, but printouts of spreadsheets and internal memos she discreetly copied over the past few months from discarded papers and unlocked computer screens during her late-night rounds. "I've noticed some irregularities. For example, significantly inflated executive bonuses year after year, even when the company's performance was declining, and large, unexplained expenses routed through offshore consultant firms. Oddly, the research and development budget seems to have been slashed to a bare minimum around the same time these expenses began to rise." Mr. Henderson, the CFO who had earlier asked if she'd lost her mop, suddenly looked very green. He avoided eye contact, fiddling with his pen. "Mr. Henderson," Emily addressed him directly. "As Chief Financial Officer, were you aware of these discrepancies?" Henderson stammered, "Well, I mean, some of the accounting practices were aggressive, perhaps. I may have had some suspicions, but Mr. Hale assured me everything was above board." He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Suspicions are not enough when hundreds of jobs and the company's future are at stake," Emily said, her voice hardening slightly. "It seems a full, independent audit is in order." She looked around the table. "I propose that Mr. Preston Hale be suspended from his duties as CEO, pending the results of this audit." Preston leaped to his feet. "This is an outrage. A coup. You have no idea how to run a company. You're a janitor." "I know how to be honest, Mr. Hale," Emily replied. "And I know this company was built on more than just profit margins. It was built on innovation and respect for its workers. Things that seem to have been forgotten." She looked at the board members. "All those in favor of suspending Mr. Hale pending a full audit?" Slowly, hands went up. First Martha Evans, then a few others who perhaps saw the writing on the wall or maybe even felt a flicker of long-suppressed conscience. Mr. Henderson, looking terrified, reluctantly raised his. Logan, Preston's sharp-suited, sycophantic vice president and widely known as Preston's number 2, abstained, his face a careful blank. The motion passed. Preston Hale sank back into his chair, defeated, his smirk finally gone, replaced by a look of utter shock. "Then it's settled," Emily said. She took a deep breath. This was the part she hadn't fully prepared for, the next logical step. Until the audit is complete and a new way forward is determined, I will assume the responsibilities of interim CEO. The janitor who had walked in with the folder was now incredibly in charge. The silence in the room was no longer just stunned, it was tinged with a dawning, unbelievable reality. Emily Walker's first act as interim CEO wasn't to move into Preston Hale's opulent corner office. Instead, she stood in the doorway, looked at the oversized mahogany desk, the plush leather chairs, and the panoramic view of the small town, and shook her head. "This room is too big for one person," she declared to a bewildered-looking administrative assistant. "Let's clear it out. We'll turn it into a shared ideas lab. A place where engineers, designers, even folks from the factory floor can come together and brainstorm. No closed doors." The news spread through Hale Manufacturing like wildfire. The janitor was CEO. And she wasn't acting like any CEO they'd ever known. The exclusive executive lunchroom, with its catered meals and hushed conversations, was open to all employees. The stale coffee and vending machine snacks in the workers' break room were replaced with fresh fruit, sandwiches, and a new, high-quality coffee machine. Maintenance workers, the very people Preston Hale had planned to fire first, received an immediate 25% raise. Emily knew their pay had been stagnant for years, their pleas for better equipment ignored. "You keep this place running," she told them personally. "It's time you were valued for it." She didn't hide in meetings or behind emails. She walked the factory floor, not with a mop, but with a notepad, listening. She held town hall meetings in the main canteen, standing not on a podium, but among the workers. "My name is Emily Walker," she'd begin, her voice clear and strong. "My grandfather, Henry Walker, helped build this company. For too long, many of you have been overlooked, your ideas ignored, your hard work taken for granted. That stops now. No one in this company gets to feel invisible anymore." The reaction was astounding. Seasoned machinists, men and women who had given decades to Hale Manufacturing, found tears welling in their eyes. It wasn't just the promise of job security, it was the feeling of being seen, of being heard, perhaps for the first time in years. Younger workers who had felt like cogs in a machine suddenly felt a surge of hope and excitement. The local newspaper picked up the story. The janitor CEO, how one woman's secret past just saved 400 jobs. The town, which had been bracing for economic disaster, breathed a collective sigh of relief, then started to buzz with cautious optimism. People who had only ever seen Emily pushing a cart now saw her talking with engineers about new product designs, her old, unfinished engineering textbooks apparently not forgotten. They saw her eating lunch in the now crowded canteen, not at a separate table, but right there with the welders and the forklift drivers, asking about their families, their challenges, their ideas. Staff would approach her in the hallways, not with fear, but with tentative smiles. Some even cried, overwhelmed that someone in leadership finally seemed to care about them as people, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. "We always knew this place could be better, Ms. Walker," one older woman from the assembly line told her, her voice thick with emotion. "We just needed someone to listen." Emily listened. She learned about outdated equipment that slowed production, about simple process changes that could improve efficiency, about talented young apprentices who were hungry for more training. She started to implement these changes, small at first, then bigger. The dusty, forgotten suggestion box was replaced with an open-door policy and regular brainstorming sessions. The company, so long weighed down by cynicism and fear, began to feel a flicker of its old innovative spark, the spark her grandfather had first ignited. It was a different kind of cleaning, Emily thought, but just as necessary. She was sweeping out the old grime of neglect and polishing up the hidden potential of Hale Manufacturing. Preston Hale did not go quietly. Humiliated and furious, he was determined to prove that Emily Walker, the unstable janitor, as he began to call her, was incapable of running anything, let alone a multi-million-dollar company. His first move was to use his remaining connections with the bank. Suddenly, Hale Manufacturing's accounts were frozen, a tangled mess of procedural reviews initiated by anonymous complaints. Payroll due at the end of the week was halted. Fear rippled through the workforce again. Then the media attacks began. Sleazy online blogs and certain sympathetic local news outlets started running stories painting Emily as an unqualified, vindictive opportunist. Anonymous sources from within the company claimed she was erratic, that her grandfather had been a disgruntled failure, and that this was all a bizarre family vendetta. They highlighted her janitor background, twisting it to suggest incompetence. One headline screamed, "Mop bucket millionaire, can a cleaner really steer a corporation?" Emily felt the pressure, the sting of the unfair attacks. But she didn't crumble. Her grandfather's strength, her mother's resilience, flowed through her. When a pushy reporter cornered her outside the factory, microphones thrust in her face, asking if she was in over her head, Emily looked straight into the camera, her gaze unwavering. "I may have scrubbed toilets for a living," she said, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable power, "but I never flushed trust down them." Mr. Hale and his friends seem to have forgotten what trust and integrity mean. "I haven't. We will get our people paid, and we will get this company back on track, the honest way." Her plain-spoken sincerity resonated more than Preston's slick, manufactured outrage. Meanwhile, inside Hale Manufacturing, something remarkable was happening. Jake, a young, quiet junior analyst in the finance department, a young man often overlooked by the previous management, had been inspired by Emily's courage. He'd always suspected that Preston Hale and his right-hand man, Logan, were dirty. He'd seen too many suspicious transactions, too many hastily deleted files. Working late into the night, fueled by coffee and a newfound sense of purpose, Jake started digging. He remembered seeing Logan frantically trying to wipe a secondary server during the chaos of Preston's suspension. Using skills he taught himself online, Jake managed to recover backup files, encrypted, hidden, but not hidden well enough. What he found was a bombshell. Clear evidence of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and a systematic siphoning of company funds, all directly tied to Preston Hale and Logan. It was embezzlement on a grand scale far worse than Emily had initially suspected. Jake, trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement, brought the evidence directly to Emily. The next day, as Preston Hale was preparing for a press conference to further denounce Emily and announce his legal battle to reclaim his company, federal agents, alerted by Emily's legal team armed with Jake's irrefutable evidence, walked into Logan's office and arrested him mid-phone call. The news broke just as Preston was stepping up to the podium. His carefully prepared speech died on his lips as reporters started shouting questions about Logan's arrest and federal investigations. His press conference was shut down mid-broadcast, his face a picture of dawning horror. The tide had turned decisively against him. With Preston Hale's schemes exposed and Logan facing federal charges, a sense of justice and relief settled over Hale Manufacturing. Emily called another company-wide meeting, not in the canteen this time, but in the vast, echoing space of the main factory floor amidst the silent machines that were the heart of the company. She stood on a simple wooden crate, no microphone needed, her voice carrying in the suddenly hushed space. "Most of you never knew my name when I cleaned these floors," she began, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the workers, the office staff, the engineers, all gathered together. "But I knew many of yours. I saw you arrive early and leave late. I saw the pride you took in your work, even when no one seemed to notice. I saw your ignored ideas sketched on breakroom napkins, your frustrations when good tools weren't provided, your quiet dignity in the face of disrespect. My grandfather, Henry Walker," she continued, her voice filled with emotion, "believed this company should be a place of innovation, fairness, and opportunity for everyone who worked here. Somewhere along the way, that vision was lost. We're going to find it again. Together." And they did. Emily, with the full support of a now-reformed board, Martha Evans had become a staunch ally, began to implement sweeping changes. She introduced an employee share ownership program, giving every worker a stake in the company's success. An education assistance fund was established, helping employees like her, who had to put dreams on hold, to gain new skills or finish degrees. She championed an open-door innovation policy, actively soliciting and funding promising ideas from any level of the company. The R&D department, once starved for funds, was revitalized, and engineers began working on exciting new product lines inspired by some of those napkin sketch ideas. The company didn't just survive, it began to thrive. Productivity went up, not because of threats, but because of morale. Innovation flourished. The little southern town, once on the brink, saw a resurgence. A year later, the lobby of Hale Manufacturing looked different. The old crop photograph of George Hale alone was gone. In its place was a newly restored, much larger version of the original photograph, Henry Walker and George Hale, side by side, pioneers with a shared dream. And beside it, a new, smaller photo had been added, a picture of Emily Walker, not in a suit, but in her simple blue work shirt, smiling alongside the factory workers she championed. But perhaps the most striking addition was a glass display case near the entrance. Inside, carefully preserved, was Emily's old, faded janitor uniform and her well-worn mop and bucket. Beside it, a simple brass plaque read, "Never judge someone by their title. Value every contribution." The woman who wore this uniform, Emily Walker, granddaughter of co-founder Henry Walker, saw the truth, spoke for the forgotten, and rebuilt the company you work for today with integrity and courage. Emily Walker, the once invisible night janitor, had not only reclaimed her family's legacy, she had cleaned the company from the inside out, restoring not just its finances, but its soul. And in doing so, she showed everyone that true leadership isn't about the fancy office or the title on the door, but about the strength of your character and the vision in your heart.